of the total number of business legal entities in the country. Therefore, their stable performance is critically important. The State Council attaches great importance to the impact of the COVID-19 on the SMEs. General Secretary Xi Jinping has made it clear that there must be targeted and precise policy support ready to help these companies. Premier Li Keqiang has instructed us to set up special mechanisms to help private companies, especially micro and small companies, to tide over the difficulties. On the 25th of February, the executive meeting of the State Council has made a decision on provisional loan repayment extension and the increase of concessional rate loans. Arrangements have also been made to increase support to household businesses. The MIIT is working hard to implement decisions made by the Central Committee and the State Council and to fully play its role as the coordinator of the State Council's special working group to help SMEs. We've been working with other government departments and authorities in rolling out a string of fiscal, financial, and insurance support policies. For instance, the Ministry of Finance has cut VAT tax rate for small-scale taxpayers and improved policies for rediscount, lending, and financing support to start-up companies. The NDRC has lowered the cost of electricity and gas usage. The PBOC has set up a special fund worth 300 billion RMB yuan for re-lending and increased concessional rate loans. CBIRC has encouraged financial institutions to extend loan repayment for SMEs, avoiding arbitrary cut-off and delay of loans and lending. The state administration of market regulation has also stepped up support to household businesses. We have rolled out 20 measures to support SMEs. We have convened conference calls regularly to summarize good practices of production resumption of SMEs nationwide. The policy measures recently adopted have played an important role. According to our preliminary survey, SMEs are steadily back on track to restart their work. Now over 30% have resumed their normal production. In order to let our policies to be known by more social sectors, we have piled up a policy pool which put together the policy support to SMEs in prevailing over the outbreak, so that SMEs will be more aware of these favorable policies to make the most of them. Going forward, we will earnestly implement decisions made by the Central Committee and the State Council, fully play our role in implementing the relevant favorable policies, and support SMEs in restarting their work and tiding over the difficulties caused by this outbreak of the COVID-19. Thank you. Next, I give floor to Vice Governor Liu.
Friends from the media, good afternoon. In the face of the grave challenges posed by the epidemic, the PBOC have followed the Xi Jinping thought on socialism of Chinese characteristics for a new era and implemented the important instructions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council on coordinating epidemic control and economic and social development. We've been working to promote healthy and sound development of the economy and the society. First, we provided targeted supply of funding. On top of the 300 billion yuan of rate lending facility, we're also providing concessional rate loans for those key companies that are providing materials for epidemic control. After the discount, the actual cost of financing is about 1.28%, lower than the threshold of 1.6% set by the State Council. And the second, we maintained reasonably ample liquidity. February the 3rd and 4th saw a short-term reverse repo of 1.7 trillion yuan, which helped to ensure ample liquidity and smooth operation of the financial market. And recently, the PBOC has soaked up the liquidity. But at the same time, we also maintained reasonably ample liquidity at the market. So the liquidity is still good in the market. And third, we are also seeing a decline of the overall interest rate. Through the open market operation and MLF, we lowered the rate by about 10 base points. And the LPR, 1 year and 5 year LPR, dropped by 10 and 5 base points respectively. Fourth, we are also actively communicating our policies through media reports, signed articles, and our television conference. We've made our voice heard and communicated to the market and the media our policy orientation to make our policy more transparent. Fifth, we are also ensuring smooth financial services. We are lowering the interest rate, and also the DR77 is about 2.2%. The stock market bounced back to the level before the holiday, and the RMB-US dollar exchange rate are fluctuating up and down around 7. And these responses have been commended by the IMF and the World Bank. It is generally believed that the impact of the epidemic will be temporary and limited, and the Chinese economy will continue to be resilient. There are ample policy room for stable economic growth. And we are following the decision of the 83rd Executive Meeting of the State Council to support small and medium-sized companies to restore their operation. They are our targets in the restoration of operation because they are important to the target we set for this year. Now many companies are facing difficulties of access to workers and funding. Therefore, reasonable support to these SMEs will help to boost the dynamism of the real economy, to promote high-quality growth and sustainable development of the financial market. So first of all, we will ensure ample liquidity through MLF, open market operation, and SLF. We will be able to support financial institutions in lowering the financial cost and ensuring smooth financial market operation. In this way, our credit and the increase of private financing will be growing in tandem with economic growth. We will keep the leverage ratio stable and the price level stable to offset the impact of the epidemic. And second, we will continue to employ the inclusive monetary policy measures. We have introduced the special rate lending facility, and they will be provided to companies in the list. The fund will be used for targeted areas to make sure that This fund will be targetedly channeled to the key sectors important to economic growth and epidemic control. And these operations will not be there for long. And also, we lowered the interest rate for relending targeting agricultural areas and small businesses by 0.25 percentage point. Now the rate is 2.5%. And we will synergize the financial institutions to provide concessional rate loans for SMEs. For the big national banks, we helped them to further lower their financial cost. And through inclusive financial operations, there will be more funding provided to them to support SMEs. While policy banks plays an important role in strengthening the weak links, we encourage them to supply more credit, concessional rate loans, and other facilities to help SMEs back to work. While local banks are also important in serving the small companies, we encourage them to provide inclusive financing for small companies so that they could be back to work. In the next step, we will ensure more flexible and appropriate, prudent monetary policy, and our policy will focus on supporting the real economy. By anchor expectation, expand overall amount, targeted approach, extend the credit term, and implement relevant policies. We will provide robust monetary policy support to economic growth and epidemic control to lower the impact of the epidemic and achieve our goal set for this year. Now I would like to invite Mr. Xiao Yuan.
Friends from the media, since the outbreak of the COVID-19, CBIRC has worked hard to implement instructions given by General Secretary Xi Jinping and followed the overall and unified leadership of the CPC Central Committee in prevailing over the outbreak. We have done our part to support this all-out war against the virus. First, we have strengthened credit and lending support. We have encouraged banking and insurance institutions to meet the needs of companies for production and purchasing of health and products and medical supplies. We have also provided lending support in areas such as public health infrastructure development. By 25th of February, a huge amount of financing support has been provided. Second, differentiated financing services have been provided. Banks are encouraged to adjust regional financing policies, conduct internal capital transfer pricing and differentiated performance evaluation to boost financial supplies in outbreak-hit areas. We have also introduced arrangements such as extending loan repayment, lowering interest rates of loans, and increasing credit loans and medium to long-term loans to help companies and individuals to prevail over the epidemic. Some banks have also extended the credit card repayment for companies and residents affected by the outbreak. In addition, banks and insurance institutions have also been rushing to donate in cash and kind to the affected areas. Thirdly, credit and lending support to private and SMEs in key areas. In this regard, we have ensured appropriate increase of loans to private and SMEs. For this year, we have But during the outbreak, a number of banks have lowered the interest rate of preferential rate loans by 0.5 percentage point. And fourthly, risk management and guarantee services of the insurance industry have been guaranteed. We have supported insurance companies to donate free of charge insurance services to medical institutions and companies working on the front line in the battle against the outbreak. A special insurance compensation in this area has outnumbered 76 million RMB yuan. Fifthly, we have raised the effectiveness and efficiency of financial services. We have encouraged banks and insurances to provide special arrangement for special priorities. For instance, since the outbreak of the COVID-19, insurance companies and banks have been encouraged to keep online channels open and do their usual business through the internet. This is safer, and this can also reach out to residents. For senior aged citizens, elderlies who are not so used to the internet services, telephone conferences or phone calls are encouraged to provide the usual businesses. All kinds of measures have been adopted to ensure the safety of the customers who do go to the actual sites of the banks and insurance companies. For the next step, the CBIRC will strictly follow the decisions made by the Central Committee and the State Council, make sure that there will be no systematic risks, which is our red line. Now I give the floor to Vice Chairman Tang.
Good afternoon. The State Administration of Market Regulation are working with relevant agencies to support household businesses to tide over the epidemic. And relevant measures have been adopted by the State Council. And today I would like to update you on some of our considerations and the measures that we are going to take. You are most welcome to ask questions as well. The CPC Central Committee and the State Council attach great importance to the development of household businesses. General Secretary Xi Jinping pointed out that they play an important role in promoting growth, innovation, employment, and people's livelihood. Premier Li Keqiang also stressed the importance to introduce measures to support household businesses to stabilize employment. To implement the important instruction of General Secretary Xi Jinping on coordinating epidemic control and economic and social development. On February the 25th, the State Council Executive Meeting made plans on promoting both epidemic control and the restoration of operation. The household businesses are playing an important role in bolstering market economy and expand employment. Now, in China, there are about 83.313 million, accounting for 67.1% of all market entities, and they created about 200 million jobs. Due to the epidemic, many of those household businesses are facing difficulties. It is important to help them to overcome the difficulties so that they could be back to work in an orderly manner and at an early date. This will be critical to employment, improvement of people's livelihood, and healthy and sound economic growth. Therefore, the State Council has decided to take concrete measures to facilitate the operation of household businesses. First, we will work to help them to restore the operation at an early date and in an orderly manner. In the spirit of region-specific and risk-based approach, we will work to help restore the operation in different ways and ensure the access to workers and materials. Second, we will help to lower the operational cost. There will be reduction of contribution to the social securities, VAT cuts, and other operational fees. We will also encourage different localities to help lower the rents for household businesses. Third, we will also provide them with more convenience and better services. We will also exempt private businesses from unnecessary registrations. Fourth, we will provide them better services. For those who cannot pay the electricity and gas fee for the moment, we will not cut their supply, and we will also help to lower their cost of power and gas. We will also encourage the associations and the internet platform to play a bigger role. For the next step, the administration will work with relevant authorities to introduce more specific measures, and we will also communicate those policies with different localities and private businesses so that they will have better understanding of these policies and truly benefit from these measures. We will also encourage market regulators to take more active measures to help the private businesses and to tide over this difficulty. Now we are coming to the Q&A session. Please identify yourself before asking questions.
With China National Radio, we have learned that quite many household businesses have also been affected by the outbreak of COVID-19. Can you tell us more about the financial support to this category of companies? I think this is a very important question. The PBOC has adjusted its policy support based on the actual needs of the household companies for them to restart work in an orderly manner. First, we have publicized the rate for rediscount quotas, and we have lowered the related rates
and lowered the overall rate, which helped to maintain a reasonably ample liquidity and smooth operation of the market. Now, those short-term liquidity have been soaked up, and now there are reasonably ample liquidity in the market. We established a low-cost special loan credit. These 300 billion loan credits are provided to different banks so that they will be able to support companies fighting against the epidemic. These 300 billion credit line are provided to 9 national banks and 10 smaller banks in those key localities, so that they could have those special funding to support the operation of companies producing masks and protection suits and other materials, and also supporting those logistics sectors that are critical to the epidemic control efforts. These are targeted financing for companies in the list. These measures helped to anchor market expectation and are conducive to our fight against the epidemic. By February the 25th, about 1,008 companies had access to those funding. And also our interest rate is about 1.28, lower than the 1.6% set by the State Council. The stock market and the exchange rate market are overly stable despite some fluctuations. These policy measures have been recognized overall by different sectors, and we will continue to focus on supporting the real economy. We will anchor market expectation, expand overall amount, extend the term, and ensure implementation to lower the impact of the epidemic on the economy and work to realize the goal we set for this year. We will make good use of the existing policies and measures. That means we will make good use of the special re-lending loans to support the targeted companies. The SLF and MLF and open market operation will also be make good use of, and we are also going to ensure ample liquidity through targeted RRR cards. We are going to cut the reserve requirement ratio because some banks have met the standard we set for inclusive financing, so we will cut their reserve requirement ratio to encourage them to continue to do so. We will also work to lower the interest rate and lending rate. We will also adopt more measures to support companies back to work. We will increase re-lending and re-discount credit and support banks to provide more concessional loans for small and medium-sized companies. We will encourage our banks to get refinanced through different ways, and we will introduce more new tools so that they could get refinanced. Now the banks already have access to low-cost funding, so the financial costs have been lowered to some extent. However, the capital fund is also very important for banks to provide more funding for small companies. So we will also provide more policy support so that banks will play a bigger role in boosting the real economy.
谢谢主持人，我是新华日报消费点的记者。我今天有2个问题，一个问题是对于受疫情影响的企业和行业。
For businesses and sectors affected by the epidemic, what will be the policies on the toleration of bad loans and so on? And those small companies are most vulnerable in the face of epidemic. So some companies are facing difficulties in their operation. What will be the credit policy for those companies?
You have raised 2 questions. The first one, what are the decisions to support companies and sectors affected by the outbreak, well, we encourage banks and financial institutions to extend as appropriate the loan repayment of these companies. The repayment, if due on 25th of January, that can be extended to somewhere in March. So that is the first point about the loan repayment extension and loan renewal. For a small number of companies who are severely affected, which need a longer time for recovery, but which have a promising future, the companies can consult with the companies in question on a case-by-case basis. Second, we have special arrangements for Hubei province. Hubei, the companies in that province, including big companies and smaller companies, they are subject to some provisional favorable policies. The banks are also encouraged to provide more financial support in terms of the financing costs for companies in Hubei province. And also we encourage banks to consider those companies more favorably in terms of their evaluation of their loan performance and in terms of interest rates. Thirdly, we have optimized the increase of financing arrangements for companies. We have raised the proportion of financing support to SMEs and the proportion of medium and long-term loans and the proportion of customers who receive lending support for the first time. Let me also say, for companies affected by the outbreak, our policy arrangements are also made with consideration of following aspects. First, for those companies which were in good, these policies are mainly to SMEs who face difficulties because of the outbreak, and companies who have a promising future before the outbreak of the COVID-19. These support are not to those companies which had been already in a difficult situation before the outbreak of the COVID-19. That is to say, we make sure that non-performing companies which have not been affected by the outbreak shall not take the free ride of the policies. And thirdly, we are taking a pragmatic approach. That is, we evaluate the risks as they are. For instance, if companies which are already or which still fail to pay back the loans even after some certain period of normal resumption of the work, then their category or their credit record shall be adjusted as appropriate. That is to say, if after a certain period of time of restart of the work, non-performing loans will be recorded as non-performing loans. And secondly, specific criteria for difficulties. First, in terms of sectors, this time it is mainly the catering companies, tourism companies, culture, entertainment, transportation, and logistical companies, which are heavily affected by the outbreak. The influence is very obvious. So these are the main targets of the policy support. And secondly, in terms of geographical regions, well, it is mainly Hubei province and nearby cities and provinces which have been affected. So these regions are the main destinations of policy support. And in terms of supply and industrial chains, companies in upper and lower streams of the industrial chains are likely to be more affected. So these are the dimensions or criteria we have been using in evaluating the extent of difficulties facing a company. Of course, the situation can be very specific. Sometimes we need to take a case-by-case approach. These, as I have introduced, are some overall dimensions, and we've been making it clear that companies, banks and financial institutions must make their services more precise and targeted to help companies tide over the difficulties. With CGTN, during the outbreak, many household companies have been affected, and specific policy support to them.
As I already briefed you that the State Council has made the decision to introduce a number of policy measures in support of the SMEs. These measures will take into consideration the actual need of those SMEs so that they could truly tide over the difficulties. Recently, we've done a number of research through various means. According to what we know, the difficulties are mainly in the following aspects. First is that it's hard to make decision to restart the operation. They cannot make profit even though they open the operation. And also, they have been relatively high fixed costs, such as utility fees and rents. According to our research, the utility fees and rents of a small shop may account for about 50% of its overall cost. For those larger restaurants, those fees may account to about 15 to 20% of their cost. And for hairdressing, clothes, and those grocery stores, the cost may be about 30% of the overall cost. And third is liquidity constraints. The State Council have taken into consideration those difficulties and are working to introduce more targeted measures in support of them. To help those small businesses back to work, we will implement the region-specific and risk-based approach in different sectors. The restoration of operation will be pursued in different means so that they could be back to work in an orderly manner at an early date. In order to lower the operational cost, we have been thinking about different measures. Just like my colleagues said, the financial sector will increase loans to provide targeted support. We will also allow the household businesses to make less contributions to the social security fees, or they can have deferral of contribution to those fees. And for the VAT tax, from March the 1st to the end of May, companies within Hubei will enjoy a waiver of the VAT tax, while in other localities, the rate will be lowered from 3% to 1%. About rents, the rents is a rather large amount of the overall cost. So the State Council asked different localities to introduce rent cut policies, especially in the properties held by the government or other state-owned properties will provide rent card for their lenders. And we will also have more favorable policies in other sectors. We will also facilitate the private household businesses in accessing the market. We will facilitate their registration, and the whole procedure will be carried out online. We also encourage local governments to introduce negative list for business households in terms of operation locations, so that more locations or places can be used by the household businesses. We also are going to extend the annual report from June this year to the end of this year. We will also provide better services to the household businesses. For those who cannot afford the utility fees, we will not cut their power supply. And for those worst hit sectors, they are going to enjoy relevant policies that can lower their cost for a certain period of time in their utility fees. And we will also encourage the Commerce Association and other associations to enhance communication and exchanges to support and help the household businesses. We will also encourage platforms on the internet to take their responsibilities and help the private businesses to expand the operation. Next question. Reuters, I have two questions. For SMEs and the household businesses that are not back to work, Do you have any data on their condition? And does the local governments have the ability to support these SMEs?
Thank you. Indeed, as I briefed in my opening remarks, we have a large number of SMEs. They are engaged in different sectors. Their situations are complex and different. To get a clearer knowledge about their situations, we have recently conducted a survey about their situation. We have also used the big data instruments to make judgment on their circumstances. Altogether, we have collected data of 2.2 million SMEs using cloud platforms. And based on this overall analysis, 30% of SMEs have been back to work. The proportion may not be very high, but there are some positive trends. First, the number is gradually increasing. On 26th of February, the proportion of back to work of SMEs was 32.6%, already 2.6 percentage higher than that on 22nd. And second, bigger companies are also back to work. On 26th, the proportion was 43.1%. These are companies in the manufacturing sector. So this indicates that the manufacturing sector is showing a faster rate of restoration of work. And thirdly, companies, SMEs in info technology, telecommunications have seen an over 40% of restart of the work. In 7 provinces, the reproduction rate or resumption work rate of SMEs surpassed 40%. So it shows that the policy measures we have been adopted do have paid off. But of course, if compared with larger companies, smaller companies may be more fragile and may face more difficulties because of the outbreak. Smaller companies have fewer orders, higher costs, and strained capital chains, so they face the pressure both in terms of capital flow and the flow of personnel. Many of SMEs want to restart work quickly as possible, but they are also concerned or anxious about the risks caused by the virus. Next step, the MIIT will make best efforts to coordinate with other related government authorities to focus on 3 areas. First, we will do as quickly as possible to help companies restart the work in a region-specific and precise manner. We will provide more targeted support, including logistical supplies to SMEs to better restart the work. We will also cut red tapes. We will also work in a category-based and phased manner in helping smaller companies restart the work. And we will dispatch some field coordinators to different provinces and cities to learn the situation on the ground, help resolve the difficulties, particular difficulties which may require multi-agency and cross-region coordination. Second, We will lighten the burden of smaller companies. We will work with other agencies to fully deliver the favorable fiscal, taxation, and financial policies. We will also sort out the problem of delayed payment of debts owed by big companies to small companies. We will also provide stronger help to smaller companies in the middle and lower streams of supply chains. We will also roll out better cloud services to support companies to work online. We will also help companies develop new industries and new forms of businesses by making greater use of information technologies. For
the LPR for small and medium-sized companies will be increased by 50 basis points, lowered by 50 basic points. That will be 4.5%. It will be very encouraging for them because the interest rate provided by the central bank will be 2.5%, while the rate for them by providing loans will be 4.5%. So they have about 2 percentage points of balance. And we will also provide other policy support for those smaller banks. We will help them to refinance and provide other tax and fiscal supporting policies. This is indeed an important question, but it's very difficult to give a specific answer. Because after the Executive Council, we made out our plans yesterday afternoon. We had a very good intention, and we will follow closely on how these measures or policies will be implemented. We will also improve those policies, and we encourage you to also follow closely on the implementation of these policies and provide us with advice or suggestions. Whether this amount of credit lines is enough. For those 300 billion credit line, they are yet fully used, and more companies are included in the list, and the lending are growing day by day. However, those 300 billion yuan are yet exhausted, so we will continue to make good use of them. And for the 500 billion credit line, it was raised yesterday, and if they are not going to be enough, we will increase accordingly. But there might be another situation because more companies are back to work, so they will have more funding accordingly. That means they do not have to depend on those favorable credit lines, so we will follow the situation closely.
On the second part of your question, I just add to a few points. It is true that, as you indicated, smaller banks in different localities, their main customers are usually smaller companies, and the smaller companies have been bearing the brunt of the outbreak, and therefore those smaller banks in different localities have also been affected. But in terms of the real economy, companies, well, we are only less than a month into this outbreak. So, based on the current evaluation, the smaller banks, they still have the capacity. Their liquidity ratio is about 12 to 13%. They have over 100% of the adequacy ratio, so they are able to further provide financing services to SMEs. Certainly, we need to consider the worst case scenario. We should think ahead. In the coming months, if or not, these medium and small banks are still able to provide the services in a sustainable manner. That is why we have been providing the necessary arrangements like the re-lending and rediscount quotas as introduced by my colleague in the PBOC, and also as I introduced earlier, that is the extension of loan repayment to 30th of June, and the deadline could be even deferred further for some companies in need. The whole purpose is to ensure there will be no cutoff of credit lines. For SMEs, they mainly face difficulties in terms of the strains in the capital chain. So we've been making our best effort to ensure that there is no cutoff of the capital chain. In addition, we will also continue to step up support to SMEs. We will open up some green corridors for SMEs to introduce strategic financing resources. We will also help smaller banks to step up their capacity to support SMEs. International market news. As you mentioned, stronger support to SMEs, but at the same time, how to guard against credit risks, how to lower the risk premium of banks. I give floor to my colleagues in CBIRC and PBOC. In terms of guarding against the risks, well, this has always been an important topic for us in the CBIRC. All the provisional arrangements we have rolled out, they don't mean we are relaxing guard against risks. On the contrary, they mean we are being more vigilant against the risks. Because if we don't help those smaller companies and they face the risk of no capital or no financial support, then it could be even more dangerous. So by what we've been doing, we are guarding against the risks. We actually prevented from good customers becoming bad customers, so to speak. So this is part of the means to avoid risks. In addition, when the banks providing services to these companies, the banks still adhere to their inherent standards for risk management and supervision. As I said, some companies which already ran into difficulties or became non-performing before the outbreak of the COVID-19, they are not the main targets for our support. So we've been asking the banks to take a differentiated approach. If or not, the companies are facing difficulties because and only because of the outbreak of the COVID-19, or is it because they have had problems, inherent problems, already before the outbreak? This is an important differentiation criteria.
I completely agree with my colleague. It will be a market-oriented approach, and it will be a two-way choice for the banks and the companies. And let me add another point. The relationship between the financial sector and the real economy is one between the basis and if the bank can provide necessary support to the real economy, then the company may bounce back. And if those companies cannot survive, then the bank will suffer bad loans. For I think good operation of the real economy will also help to lower the bad loans for the banks. The last two questions. Economic Daily. My question is for Vice Minister Zhang. Those innovation-driven companies and the more professional companies are more resilient in the face of risks, while for those more vulnerable companies, such as those traditional ones, the labor-intensive ones, what will be the targeted supporting measures for those companies, and how these companies could evolve?
You have raised a very professional question. We have noticed the same thing. In the face of the same challenge, the labor-intensive ones are more affected. In comparison, those smaller companies who are more specialized and sophisticated turn out to be more resilient. So far, of over 20,000 SMEs specialized in new technologies, over 50% of them have been back to work. And in some certain areas, even over 91% of SMEs in high-tech sectors have restarted the work. So it shows that getting cutting-edge technologies is important for the competitiveness of a company. Then for MIIT, we will help with those in need to resolve their financing difficulties and help them upgrade themselves to become more specialized and equipped with high technologies. First, we will help labor-intensive smaller companies increase capacity for R&D. General Secretary Xi Jinping, the CPC Central Committee, and the State Council have all made the decision to develop more specialized, more professional companies, companies which are more able to make independent research and development. Labor-intensive traditional companies will be helped to transform themselves into champions of their sector. Second, we will develop the smartness level of companies by applying in a broader basis new technologies. For instance, these can be used for the sharing of orders, and the companies will be more developed in terms of the use of ICT. During the outbreak, we have been encouraging distance coordination, conference calls, database management, and these can be helpful for companies to enter into a stage of smart manufacturing, smart production. I also hope that when the epidemic is over, we will have an opportunity to invite the media to visit some of the companies, as I mentioned. I talked about digitalized workshops and smart companies. You will all be able to see some concrete examples. And thirdly, we have identified 651 service platforms for SMEs and over 4,000 provincial level service platforms and over 2,000 provincial level bases, which will provide the services for SMEs to upgrade and transform themselves. Within 1 or 2 years' time, we will help SMEs, especially labor-intensive ones, to better coordinate with other companies in upper and lower streams of the supply chains to innovate. We will also run some special projects for innovation on addressing COVID-19, and these are all the measures to help SMEs to upgrade themselves. First question. The Fed of the United States start to worry about the increase of cases outside China. They are also concerned about the impact of the outbreak on the Chinese economy. What kind of policies will be adopted by PBRC in terms of domestic monetary policies? And what financial support will be given to companies to ensure adequate provision of wages and income to the employees?
The institutions have been worried about the impact of the epidemic to the global economy. I share their concern, and our concerns are actually materializing because the epidemic do have some impact on not only the Chinese economy and also economies around the world. Different industries and the financial markets are subject to such impact. However, I'm sure that I believe that those impacts are short-term, short-lived, and they are not going to shake the fundamentals of the Chinese economy. For how do we overcome those difficulties in China? Just like General Secretary Xi said, we should manage our own affairs well. China is the second largest economy, and we are one of the major engines for global growth. So sound Chinese economy will help to anchor a stable global economy. So China should manage its own affairs well. And how to sustain a sound growth of the Chinese economy from the perspective of monetary policy, we will continue to keep to our policy orientation of prudent monetary policy. China is one of the few countries worldwide that are still pursuing a rather conventional monetary policy. And we have ample policy room and latitude. That means we will be able to overcome difficulties ahead. We need to preserve such advantage. We will keep our monetary policy appropriate and flexible, and continue our anti-cyclical approach. For those 300 billion quota, they will be many structural ones. And for the overall amount of money, such as our open market operation, SLF and MLF, will help to keep the liquidity reasonably ample. It will also, in terms of the interest rate, now the lending rate is market-oriented. The LPR is totally based on the market. And since we introduced this market-based LPR, the interest rate has been on a lowering trend. So the rate throughout the sector have been decreasing, and there are more room for lowering rate. So we will continue our reform to improve our institutions and system to unleash the potential to continue to lower the rate. For the reform of the LPR, we've made some progress previously. For additional loans, the LPR are employed rather than using the previous set interest rates. And for this 300 billion or 500 billion quota, we ask the banks to keep in tandem with the LPR. So more loans are using the LPR. Well, for those existing loans, we are also trying to transform the set rate to the LPR. And we will continue to advance this reform as planned. In this way, we will be able to continue to lower the interest rate. And during the epidemic, we will work to provide online services as much as possible for those that cannot be carried out online. We also instruct the commercial banks to provide services based on pre-order or booking services. Those commercial banks are also working out on different approaches. The reform will be completed as scheduled. As for the question about employment, we are going to host a conference next morning, and this question will be answered. Thank you.